Um, so picture this. It's 1981, and a high school teacher decides to take this massive pay cut, right? He walks into the offices of a tabletop gaming company and just hands them a 28-page document that, honestly, it essentially broke all of their established rules.
Right. And they hired him on the spot.
Exactly,
Yeah.
on the spot. And today, that's exactly what we are taking a deep dive into. We've got this fascinating archival dossier on a specific tabletop role-playing module. It's called Dwellers of the Forbidden City, module code I1, authored by David Zeb Cook.
It really is a fascinating piece of history. I mean, this 28-page manuscript, it represents the exact threshold of what gaming historians refer to as the Electrum Age.
The Electrum Age. I love that term.
Yeah, it's great. It's this precise moment when tabletop games, they stopped being these arbitrary, malicious obstacle courses and started evolving into the narrative-driven sandboxes we recognize today.
Right. And I want to set the stakes right at the top for you listening. Because whether you've been, rolling 20-side dice for decades, or maybe you've never sat down at a tabletop in your life, you are really going to want to hear this.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you have ever played, like, an open-world video game or read a story with a deeply factional living world, you have experienced the ripples of the design philosophy that was pioneered right here in this document. It is effectively a masterclass in how interactive world building actually works.
And the premise itself is just a perfect distillation of that world building. You have this steaming, inhospitable
It's a
jungle.
very classic pulp setup.
Very classic. And a consortium of wealthy merchants is just bleeding money because their trade caravans keep getting brutally ambushed. And the few survivors are returning with these feverish tales of mutated plants and stolen riches being dragged deep into this impenetrable rainforest.
Right, so there's the hook.
Exactly. So a group of adventurers is hired to go in, find the source of the ambushes, and just stop the bleeding.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand why exploring this jungle city was such a revolutionary concept for players back in 1981, we kind of have to look at the incredibly brutal era of game design that came immediately before it. The late 1970s. The Golden Age.
Yes, spearheaded by the game's co-creator Gary Gygax. During this period, the premier tabletop adventures, specifically the G series and the S series modules, they were designed as tournament funnels.
Which sounds terrifying, honestly. Funnels.
Oh, it was. They were highly lethal, plot-like gauntlets explicitly designed for convention play.
And when you say convention play, we need to picture what that actually looked like at the table for a player.
Yeah.
Like, you sit down with a group of complete strangers, you're handed a pre-generated character, and a literal timer starts ticking.
Yes, a literal stopwatch in many cases.
And your only objective is to basically survive a dungeon architect who actively wants to kill your character with these completely arbitrary traps, like you were scored on your mechanical mastery and, just how far you made it before dying.
Precisely. It was a purely adversarial relationship between the designer and the player. I mean, the expectation was that you would be punished for the slightest misstep. And Dwellers of the Forbidden City was actually originally slated to be one of those punishing experiences.
Wait, really? It wasn't meant to be a sandbox?
No, the dossier notes that TSR initially assigned it the product code S4, the S standing for special, which placed it in the exact same lineage as legendary meat grinders like the Tomb of Horrors.
But then they suddenly pivot. TSR just strips it of the S4 title, hands that code off to a different module, and instead they use Zeb Cook's Jungle Adventure to inaugurate a brand new line, the I series, for intermediate.
Right.
So why the sudden shift? I mean, if the tournament funnels were the gold standard, why abandon the formula?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it was because the industry demographics were shifting rapidly, like incredibly fast. The player base was exploding, and a new generation of designers and players, they were just demanding something fundamentally different from their games.
They didn't want to just be tortured anymore.
Exactly. They didn't want to just test their mathematical prowess against a trap designed to instantly kill them for, touching the wrong doorknob. They wanted coherent narratives. They wanted to explore a living wilderness.
Zeb Cook delivered that right out of the gate. He actually used the main hall sequence of this adventure, which he ran in his own home campaign, as his writing sample, basically his resume, to get hired as the third member of TSR's design department.
And when he expanded that main hall into the published 28-page module, he completely shattered the tournament funnel structure, just broke it.
Yeah.
He gave players 5 distinct entry paths into the ruined city.
Which is, it's a profound shift in player psychology. Because Path 1 is your traditional linear tournament gauntlet, like a trapped corridor testing your logic. But Paths 3, 4, and 5, they're completely open-ended wilderness exploration.
The players could scale the cliffs, navigate the jungle canopy, or, find a hidden back door.
It changes the entire conversation at the table. Like, instead of the players sitting there sweating, thinking, how do we survive this hallway?
Yeah.
They're suddenly looking at a map and saying, hey, how do we want to approach this environment?
It gives them agency.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the tabletop equivalent of playing this punishing escape room where the designer actively wants you to fail, and then suddenly you're booting up Skyrim or early Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah.
You are dropped into an open-world sandbox and just told to figure out.
And by doing so, Cook drastically increased the replayability of the module. I mean, 2 different groups could play this exact same game and have entirely different experiences based entirely on their entry point.
Oh, for sure.
But, of course, if the adventure is no longer just a linear, trap-filled hallway, it forces a massive structural change for the Dungeon Master.
Right. Because if the players aren't just, rolling dice to disarm traps for 3 hours, what is the Dungeon Master actually managing behind the screen? I'm looking at the dossier here, and instead of a dungeon, they are running a complex sociological ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a big shift.
And I have to be honest, managing a living political ecosystem sounds like a logistical nightmare for a Dungeon Master in 1981. Like, how were they supposed to keep track of all this without a computer simulating the background events?
Well, that is the brilliance of how Cook structured the faction puzzle. So the module is set in the Hmonalan jungle within the world of Greyhawk, but it is deliberately modular, meaning a dungeon master could transplant the city into any home campaign.
Anywhere with a jungle, basically.
Right. And the city itself is essentially this massive cloaked ruin reclaimed by nature, and it's currently occupied by these violently opposed factions.
The dossier actually points out that Cook was heavily inspired by a 1936 Robert E. Howard novella, a Conan the Barbarian story called Red Nails.
Yes. And Red Nails revolves around a lost roofed city trapped in a bloody, multi-generational stalemate between degenerated factions. Cook really wanted to capture that visceral pulp fantasy tension.
Yeah, he totally does.
He built an environment where ancient grudges dictate survival, and he provided the Dungeon Master with very clear motivations for each faction, which made them super easy to run on the fly without needing a computer.
Well, let's break down those factions, because they are incredibly distinct. Operating as the shadowy puppet masters at the top of the hierarchy, you have the Yuan-ti, a cult of religious fanatic snake men.
They are the ones actually orchestrating the caravan raids that brought the players to the jungle in the first place, and they view literally every other faction in the city as either disposable slaves or ritual sacrifices.
Lovely folks. Then you have the bullywugs, who are highly territorial frogmen. They live in the flooded, swampy regions of the ruins, and they worship a panlong dragon as a living god.
Right.
Up in the jungle canopy, you have the Tazloi and the bugbears who act as mercenaries. And then at the absolute bottom of the social ladder, you have the Mongrelmen, who we absolutely need to talk about in a minute. But trying to unite all these disparate groups is this central mastermind.
Horan, an evil human magic user who operates from a fortified compound within the ruins.
Wait, so instead of just kicking down a door and fighting a boss, players have to play politics. Is this like a tropical Game of Thrones?
That is exactly what it is. This is the birth of faction play. Haran's presence is what turns the entire module into a tactical puzzle. The game actively discourages players from treating this like a traditional dungeon crawl. I mean, you simply cannot clear this city room by room.
You just die.
You will run out of hit points, spells, and resources almost immediately. There are simply too many enemies.
So if you can't fight your way through, you are forced to talk to them on.
Exactly. You have to decide your political approach. Do you forge an alliance with the oppressed factions? Do you leverage the religious rivalries and pit the bullywugs against the Yuan-ti? Or do you launch surgical, tactical strikes against Haran's compound to shatter the stalemate?
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because for that tension to actually work at the table, the creatures themselves had to feel genuinely threatening and, well, alien. And Zeb Cook used this module to introduce brand new, iconic creatures that fundamentally shifted the tone of tabletop gaming for the next 40 years. He moved it away from traditional Tolkien-esque fantasy, your standard goblins and orcs, and pushed it straight into weird fiction and cosmic horror.
What's fascinating here is the bestiary he developed. It is legendary. And the prime example of that shift toward cosmic horror is the Aboleth.
Oh man, the description of the Aboleth is terrifying. It is this massive, aquatic, Lovecraftian, tentacled fish entity. But it's not just a big monster that bites you. It possesses psionic mind control capabilities, and it is worshipped by the locals as a literal god.
Cook designed it as a direct nod to H.P. Lovecraft, an alien intelligence dreaming in the dark. It changes the stakes of an encounter entirely. You aren't just risking your character's life, you are risking their autonomy. They could be psionically enslaved.
Which is so much scarier than just losing hit points.
Oh, absolutely. And then you have the Yuan-ti, making their very first appearance in the game here. They aren't just generic snake monsters. They are a sophisticated society utilizing varied genetic mutations ranging from purebloods, who look mostly human, to half-bloods, to these terrifying, massive abominations.
The creatures that fascinated me the most mechanically, however, were the Mongrelmen. They are the beings at the absolute bottom of this city's hierarchy. The dossier describes them as the tragic, chaotic, neutral genetic refuse of humans, orcs, dwarves, and bugbears.
Right.
And the mechanics Cook designed for them are incredibly specific. Usually monsters are just bags of hit points to be defeated, right? But the Mongrelmen have an 80% success rate at hiding, and that percentage goes up by 1% for every single turn they spend staying hidden.
This is where we see mechanics directly reinforcing the narrative. In the early days of tabletop games, you walk into a room, you see monsters, you roll your dice, you deplete their hit points, and you take their treasure. But the Mongrelmen are mechanically built to avoid the players entirely.
Right, so if a creature has an 80% chance to hide and is actively trying to run away from you, and you as a player choose to hunt them down, the game is forcing you to confront your own actions.
It really is.
You realize you are committing an act of cruelty. You aren't a hero clearing a dungeon anymore. You are hunting marginalized victims who are already heavily abused by every other faction in the city.
Yeah.
It introduces actual moral ambiguity to the table without the dungeon master having to say a single word.
It is brilliant, silent storytelling through probability. And Cook cross-pollinated these new creations with monsters from the recently published Fiend Folio, like the yellow musk creeper, which is this horrifying parasitic plant to ensure the entire jungle ecosystem felt completely alien, cohesive, and deeply unsettling.
But to convey that alien environment to the players, the visual presentation of the game had to evolve as well, right? The maps and the art needed to communicate this massive vertical space. And what's incredible is that this huge artistic leap forward happened during a massive behind-the-scenes corporate crisis.
Yes, 1981 was an incredibly volatile period for TSR's art department. Two of their established superstar illustrators, Jeff Dee and Bill Willingham, had abruptly quit in protest over the company's firing practices.
Wow.
Yeah, and this created a massive void in the production pipeline. Right at the moment, Dwellers of the Forbidden City needed to be finalized and shipped.
I just try to picture the stress of that environment. It's like a famous rock band losing its lead singers mid-tour, and the roadies have to step up to the mic and somehow end up recording a masterpiece. You need functional, evocative art to run the game, and you need it yesterday.
And what they managed to produce under that pressure was a mix of the remaining old guard and newcomers stepping up. Errol Otis drew the cover, which perfectly captures the weird Pulp Fiction danger of the module.
There's a great note in the dossier that contemporary reviewers were completely baffled by one of the characters on that cover. It features a strangely dressed spellcaster wearing this highly impractical, curved, striped hat.
Yeah, the hat is iconic.
It's very quirky, but it immediately signals that you aren't in a standard medieval castle anymore.
And inside the module, Jim Rosloff provided incredibly rich interior art. But the true visual masterpiece, the element that changed the way games were played, was the cartography.
The map, by Stephen D. Sullivan. What did this 3D map actually mean for the people sitting at the table?
Well, prior to this module, tabletop RPG maps were strictly flat, top-down architectural blueprints. They were functional, but they lacked visual depth. Sullivan decided to experiment, and he created the first ever isometric, meaning 3D perspective, map in the game's history.
And for context, an isometric map requires vastly more effort to produce than a top-down blueprint. We are talking about 1981 here. There is no drafting software.
None at all.
Sullivan is sitting there calculating three-dimensional perspective, angles, and elevations by hand, likely with a protractor and a T-square, on a massive time crunch.
It was a mathematical nightmare for him to draft, and it severely slowed down production. In fact, Sullivan reportedly regretted the experiment because of the sheer exhaustion it caused him.
Oh, I bet.
But you have to look at what that map accomplished at the table. Instead of the dungeon master having to read 3 paragraphs of dense text describing the height of the cliffs, the location of the swamp, and the tiered elevations of the ruined buildings, players could simply look at the isometric map and instantly understand the verticality of the space without reading any text.
They could immediately visualize this massive sunken city resting at the bottom of a geological rift. And it was so impactful that it spawned its own persistent urban legend within the gaming community, the Alaska Map Myth.
Right, the Alaska myth.
The dossier notes there was a long-standing rumor that Sullivan achieved the organic, realistic look of the map's geological rift by literally tracing the borders of Alaska.
Which is a myth that has been firmly debunked by cartographers.
Totally debunked.
But the fact that the rumor existed for decades shows just how deeply that map embedded itself in the community's imagination. It looked so natural compared to straight, blocky dungeon corridors that players assumed it had to be traced from the real world. And Sullivan's exhausting sacrifice paved the way for the complex, three-dimensional cartography we would see in famous later modules like Ravenloft.
So if we look at the whole package, we have a module that introduces faction politics, cosmic horror, moral ambiguity through game mechanics, and three-dimensional cartography. It sounds like a perfectly modern, immersive game.
It does.
But then the dossier details what it calls the Electrum Age dissonance, because despite all these massive leaps forward, Dwellers couldn't completely escape the era it was written in, resulting in some truly bizarre structural contradictions.
The most glaring example of which is Room 18.
Okay, Room 18 is wild. So you as a player are exploring this naturalistic, grounded jungle cavern. You are dealing with the gritty politics of marginalized factions and snake cults. And then you walk into Room 18 and you find an anti-gravity sphere attached to the ceiling, holding an upside-down, locked, and magically trapped chest that contains a vital key.
It completely defies all internal consistency. It shatters the immersive simulation the rest of the module worked so hard to build.
That is completely wild. It's like watching a gritty, grounded historical war documentary, and suddenly a glowing Super Mario floating question block appears out of nowhere. Why would a grounded ecosystem have an upside-down floating treasure chest?
Because of the Electrum Age Chimera effect. The module is caught between two eras. It simultaneously wants to simulate a living, breathing ecosystem, and it wants to test your video game puzzle logic because it couldn't fully shake its convention tournament origins.
Oh, yeah.
The designers knew that tournament players expected logic traps. If they didn't encounter a bizarre puzzle that tested their ingenuity, they would feel cheated. That anti-gravity chest wasn't designed to make sense in the context of a ruined city. It was blatantly designed to test players.
It's the growing pains of a new medium printed right there on the page. But those growing pains ultimately birthed a legacy that is still actively shaping games today. The dossier highlights that the 2017 5th edition campaign, Tomb of Annihilation, is a direct, deliberate homage to Zeb Cook's work.
Yes, the central location in that modern campaign is a city called Omu, and Omu borrows its faction-torn jungle metropolis DMA entirely from Dwellers of the Forbidden City.
Wow, it really is a direct line.
It features the Yuan-ti as the primary antagonists, it revolves around a sunken ruin, and it even presents the players with a pictorial isometric map as a direct nod to Sullivan's original cartography.
Even the minor throwaway details survived, which I love. When Cook ran the original 1980 tournament that got him hired, he provided a list of pre-generated characters for the players. One of them was a 7th-level magic user named X the Mystic.
Oh, yes.
Decades later, the designers of the modern 5th edition Monster Manual revived that exact character, using him to provide canonical lore and flavor quotes for the monsters in the book. He even makes an appearance in Tomb of Annihilation.
It demonstrates the incredible, enduring shadow of this single 28-page text.
When we look back at Dwellers of the Forbidden City, we are essentially looking at the exact moment interactive storytelling leveled up. A high school teacher's home campaign writing sample birthed a new era of open-ended exploration, shifting the entire medium away from arbitrary punishment and toward living, breathing worlds.
It proved that the most memorable adventures aren't the ones that force players down a rigid, predetermined path. The most enduring games provide an inspiring, logical framework and then step back, inviting the players to actively participate in the act of creation.
And whenever you, as a listener, sit down to enjoy a game or read a book or play a tabletop session that features deeply factional worlds where your choices actually alter the political landscape, you're experiencing the direct results of what Zeb Cook built in 1981.
But, studying this archival dossier also leaves us with a complex historical reality to consider, drawn from the dossier's discussion hooks. Modern reprints of this module now carry explicit legacy disclaimers.
Right.
The 1930s pulp literature that served as the primary inspiration for this adventure, specifically stories like Robert E. Howard's Red Nails, relied heavily on the literary tropes of their time. Tropes concerning quote-unquote degenerate races, marginalized genetic anomalies, and outdated sociological prejudices.
Right. The foundation of the sandbox was built on the pulp fiction tropes of its era.
Which leaves you with an interesting, difficult question to mull over as you engage with the history of interactive media. As we continue to build, expand, and play in these incredibly intricate living worlds, how much of our foundational fantasy lore is built upon those outdated sociological prejudices?
It's a tough question. Can we ever truly decouple the brilliant, innovative game mechanics from the historically flawed literary tropes that originally inspired them?
It is something that definitely stays with you. Just like the image of that steaming jungle hiding its massive, layered secrets behind an impenetrable wall of green, waiting for someone to finally step off the linear path and see what's actually inside.